Hello, welcome back to the JB podcast, the JB Cast, episode number 27.
Welcome, fam.
We're here today with myself, Paul Photophily, Joe Worthington.
Hello.
To your award.
Hi.
And special guest, Kareem Solomon.
Hello.
Welcome, bro.
Welcome.
Thanks. Welcome, Kareem.
We're down at 15 Underwood Avenue, Botany, for anyone that wants to come and visit us and learn about the Fight, Lift, Move methodology that we've created. You can catch us on YouTube. You can catch us on Instagram. If you just want to know more about it or have a chat to us, you can reach out through the website, junglebrothers.com. And special shout out to our boy Tree and to Panavore Cafe. They're supplying the coffee that we're sipping on today.
Thank you.
Yeah, fuck. Thank you so much.
Delicious.
Last week we were super hyped, like actually turbocharged because I might have had a bit too much coffee. But I plan to go there again today. Today's topic, we're trying to come up with a name for it, and today's topic is vanquishing your inner critic and overcoming mental barriers. And this is a big field and a big topic. And it was actually, Kareem, that was something that you brought up because you train with us, and I know that you're an interesting guy and you're a well-studied guy.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're a fascinating dude. And I asked you to come on, and you said, well, I could talk about this. So I was like, dude, talk about it. So could you start with maybe a little intro on your journey, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, what I'm doing is I'm studying Organisational Psychology, and I work in a psychiatric hospital. So I've done the equivalent of 4 years studying psychology. Learned a whole bunch of really interesting things. A lot of interesting science in there. But some of it I've been able to apply. Some of it, I've really struggled with. I think in terms of my own sort of journey around health and fitness, it's been all over the place for me. There's been times in my life where I have been really disciplined and on top of the ball, and able to sort of stick to routine and that sort of thing. But it's sort of come and gone over the course of my life, but it always has been an interest for me. So I think going back to high school, I got my Cert 3 in fitness instruction when I was in year 11. So
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's.
So you're very well educated.
So what? What we were learning back then is very different.
It's the same shit.
Honestly, I felt like I rocked up here and had to chuck out half the textbook. With
the whole textbook.
No, definitely a very different way of doing things here at JB Brothers, which I've just been, psyching up in my journey.
You have been.
How'd you find us? And what drew you to?
Really interesting story, actually. Yeah, I was in Thailand. I went to Thailand to train for a couple of months on Soi Thai Jed. That's where Tiger Muay Thai is, and there's a whole bunch of fitness gyms. There's a bit of a fitness mecca
full of ass kickers
in Thailand. And one of the guys I went on a meditation retreat there actually, and one of the guys I met on meditation retreat he was also training at Soi Thai Jed in Phuket, and we just got to talking a bit, and it was pretty much on the same wavelength as me when it comes to sources of information, so this guy was just we're vibing on that level, and he's like, look, if you're in Sydney, you have to check out Jungle Brothers.
Who was it?
So this guy's name is Robert Beale. He's a Dutch guy. He's never been here before. But
I've seen this guy on our social media.
So shout out Rob. He's
shout out Rob.
What a ledge.
He's
our tentacles stretch far and wide.
So he was doing a gymnastics apprenticeship over there with G&B Fitness, and he's really into the whole movement culture thing, and he was really impressed by what you guys are doing. He's like, you absolutely have to check it out. So I came down here, checked it out, loved it, stuck with it. So
fuck, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Joe, send that guy a T-shirt.
So,
I do know him. I know he's commented on stuff, and we've had an exchange. It's BIJL.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Beal?
Yeah, well,
How do you pronounce
I'm just
it?
taking a guess and all honesty. I don't actually know.
Vigil.
Yeah.
That's a wicked story.
That's
So
cool,
then
man.
you just
Yeah.
dialed up and...
You came to it was an open day or a family and
Yeah,
friends
it was
day,
an
I
open
remember.
day when you guys first moved here. So,
You live around here?
I live in Hurstville.
And did you grow up in Sydney?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I've been in my whole life. So, yeah.
Nice, man.
You said you studied organizational?
Organizational psychology.
Okay, what does
So,
that mean?
Yeah, so it's a specialization. You know, I've only just started studying it. I'm about one term into it, and just started placement as well. So organizational study is more about psychology in the workplace. So it's more focused on, you know, like how. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things in there. So there's things like leadership development. There is some mental health stuff in there as well. There's like selection and assessment. You know, just creating environments that are, you know, psychologically safe, and what sort of, you know, principles can be applied from psychology to actually help people, you know, whether it be manage change or produce more effectively, or you know, it works on a whole bunch of different levels there. So
Yeah, okay. Where did you study at?
so I studied. I did my undergrad at ACAP, Australian College of Applied Psychology, and I'm currently studying at Macquarie University. So before all that, I did a business degree at UTS like 10 years ago. So
Tell me, you mentioned just before when you were talking about the studies and your personal journey with health and fitness.
yeah.
Was part of the impetus for you to go and study psychology, did that come from your own experience and your, like, dealing with your own psychology in a way? Is that kind of part of the journey?
Yeah, that's actually, like, for a lot of people that wind up in, you know, whether it be psychology or counselling or any sort of mental health related field, you know, it's quite common for people, you know, to have been touched in some way, either in their own personal lives or the lives of their loved ones, you know, by a mental health issue, which sort of draws their attention and their focus, and then, you know, leads to, I guess, a fascination and wanting to help other people. So, yeah, my story definitely fits that mold. You know, there's something called a wounded healer archetype that dates back like centuries, apparently. So it's not anything new. But yeah, I've had my own sort of challenges that, you know, I've been fortunate enough to you know, to make it past. But, you know,
It makes total sense. Like if you want to deal with somebody that has already travelled the path that you're going through successfully, and we get it all the time in our gym, even with the coaches that have been through tough times, come out the other end, and they're fitter and stronger for it on a physical level. And people are drawn to that person because they're like, oh, okay, there's a journey there. They've gone to places that I'm going through now, and they've overcome it, so they've got an answer.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it definitely facilitates empathy. So, you know, when you understand what someone else is going through, having, you know, lived that experience, and when the other person assumes that you understand as well, you know, when they can, you know, they have some sort of idea of, you know, where you've been and what you've done. Again, the assumption is that they're going to take you more seriously. So,
strong leadership.
You're legitimate.
There is an argument in psychology that, you know, there's sort of a limit to the benefit of empathy, because, you know, if you're trying to make an objective decision that's based on the science and that's sort of not influenced by your own personal experience, then sometimes that can sort of cloud judgment a little bit. So
it's an interesting point.
Yeah. But no, I mean, in terms of just talking to people and connecting with people, absolutely, you know, it helps.
So, you know, on that, could you talk a little bit more on the fitness journey for you, and maybe what the struggles have been? Because you've alluded to that. Well, what's been the hurdles there?
Sure. So, well, I guess from a young age, you know, I was an overweight kid. So somewhere along the line, I don't even know how it happened, but, you know, I think I just ran around a lot at recess and lunch, and then, you know, I wound up on an athletics team, doing sprints. you know, and I was still like a pretty big guy back then. So, you know, it was a little bit weird to see, you know, one of the bigger guys. Usually it was the small little skinny kids out on the spread team. And then I don't know. I guess I just kept running around. I got into kickboxing when I was about 13. You know, so I stuck with that for a bit, and you know, fell in love with Muay Thai, and you know, got into, you know, Bruce Lee philosophy, and you know, went down that rabbit hole. So, but yeah, I guess you know, I had moments in high school where I was sort of able to get up on a regular basis, and you know, do those 5 o'clock runs and you know, that sort of thing. But the motivation has sort of, you know, come and gone for me, you know, over time. And you know.
Tell me about what that, when it was gone, what did that look like to you? Like these hurdles that you're talking about, where things were up and down.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I guess it's, you know, difficult to describe, but you know, I do remember sort of being in that headspace, and you know, on the one hand, it was like, I know I should be doing something, but I should be, you know, getting out there and having people around me that sort of were, you know, you know, were sort of kicking goals in that department as well, and I guess, you know, part of that inner critic was you know, I can't reach that level. You know, they've gone down. They're doing something that I can't do.
Fallen behind, too far to catch up, kind of feeling.
Yeah, definitely. So, and then, you know, as you know, the eating behaviours start to change, you know, and I start to chuck on some more weight, you know, then it's a case of, okay, you know, I'm not even like physically capable of starting. You know, like, what do I start for? You know.
So that gap gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, yeah, and it just sort of gets more and more demoralising around. Okay, you know, what am I actually doing? So,
what does that stem from? So dealing with your inner critic and comparing yourself to others, is that because they seem like they're two different things to me, but are they one in this? Is it one and the same thing? Is there something that you're dealing with inside your? I mean, obviously.
Yeah. So, really, you know, what I've come to learn since is that, you know, there's you know, we were talking about this beforehand, the shame emotion. So, shame is you know, when we talk about emotional awareness, you know, like if you're angry or sad or happy, you know, there's some emotions that are pretty easy to sort of recognize. You know, shame is one that's a little bit more difficult, and it's really pervasive in that, you know, it can sort of wind up, you know, influencing major decisions in your life without even being aware of it. And the way I conceptualize it is that, you know, when you are feeling shame, you know, it's able to feed that inner critic, you know, so it influences the thought pattern in a direction of you know, I'm not worthy, I'm not, you know, I'm you know, there's again feelings of inferiority, you know, there's this comparison between you and what everyone else is doing, feeling like
not capable.
It's a really not capable, but you know, a lot of it sort of revolves around judgment. You know, judgment of yourself, you know, even judgment of others, you know, sort of factors into it as well.
Peers.
Or how you perceive others are going to be judging you. So, you know, again, you know, Brené Brown has done some amazing work around this, if anyone is interested in disappearing down the rabbit hole. So she's got some TED Talks, YouTube videos.
Who is she?
Brené Brown.
So she's a shame researcher.
Okay.
You know, it's a book that she wrote called The Power of Vulnerability. Was something that, you know, had quite a profound impact on my life. So, I think, you know, part of the solution is you know, learning to identify, you know, when we are experiencing those feelings of inferiority, when we are making those comparisons, or when we're telling ourselves this is what we should be.
So let's say you're going into this space, because we've all been there. I've been there myself.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's very difficult. Like for some people, it's harder than others.
Yeah.
Is there like a checklist that you can go through? Like what kind of tools do you need to to deal with like once you've recognized something, sure, you've recognized it, but then you have to have a solution for it.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Sure. So, look, I mean, again, a lot of the stuff Brene Brown talks about is just around, shining a light on it, bringing it out into the open, because, these things...
Like verbally? Like talking to...
Yeah, like actually, being able to, to share, what's going on for you and acknowledge it. And, I think that these things thrive in secrecy, and the tendency is for us to shove it down or pretend it's not happening or even judge ourselves for feeling that way. It's like a double emotion. It's like,
Yeah, because we think we shouldn't feel like that.
Yeah.
Don't we? We should be kind of confident and happy. And
so you judge yourself for judging yourself. Like,
yeah.
That's a bit of a mind screw, that one.
Oh.
But
That sounds like a downward spiral, that one.
Yeah, absolutely. But, look, I think, there's
So finding good community is people you can feel trust enough to open up to.
Yeah. So being able to, and this is where connection, comes into the equation, because when you come to realize that you're not the only person that's feeling this way, that everyone has experienced that at some point in their life. And you feel comfortable enough to, or you might even be stepping outside your comfort zone in terms of actually, talking about, what's going on for you. But, invariably the person that you're talking to is going to be able to relate on some level. You're sharing a piece of yourself, you're getting vulnerable, and it gives the other person a chance to be able to reciprocate. And these are the things that build trust and facilitate connection, and they just help us feel like we're not alone. I think, sort of the antidote to this comparison that this is how normal people behave and I'm like way below the line is to understand that no, this is, everyone does have this thought pattern to some extent around, things that they feel like they're just not good enough in,
How do you know on that? Because I'm guessing if we go to the other end of the spectrum, well, not the other end of the spectrum, but the other side of the argument, perhaps, which is that, like, you have to have an amount of, you can't just be infinitely sort of confident, right? Like, there has to be an amount of, oh, maybe I can't do that, or maybe I'm not good enough yet.
Well,
how do you know when it hits that point of
Not useful.
Yeah, and it's unhealthy, or
and I guess this is one of the things I've sort of toyed with, because you're absolutely right. There is a flip side to this paradigm we're discussing here. On the one hand, this idea of humility, that when you experience shame, like say for example, if you are getting a little bit big for your boots, being able to connect to a level of humility and maybe having a failure can be a good thing for you. Just to remind yourself that you are human. That none of us are perfect, and being able to sort of acknowledge that there is that room for growth, there is that there is that knowledge that other people have to share with me. There are still things I can learn. There are still places that I can grow to. So I think that on the one hand, I think part of the traditional dialogue around shame is like if you feel like you're not good enough, you feel like this is you have to conquer your inner bitch, you have to shove it down and move past that. And when you hear a lot of motivational speakers talk about you just got to get rid of that mind frame and break out of it and power through and fight it, and it's like, look,
setting them up for a fall.
It's not really helpful.
Well, look, I mean that's going to work for some people. I just don't see that as being sort of a sustainable way of actually dealing with like what you're experiencing, because I've just I'm seeing it in some people. They can switch it on for like a day or two. It's like, okay, all right, cool, I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump into it. And look, in fairness, I've fallen down that trap myself. But I get psyched up and I listen to like C.T. Fletcher or something. Just jump in the gym and want to go for it. But
it fades away.
It does fade away, and I think for me. Part of the mental barrier of even rocking up to the gym to begin with is this idea that you know, I'm going to rock up and there's going to be people that are doing some super cool stuff that I've got no chance of doing. You know, like if I rock up, you know, I see people doing handstands like everywhere. You know, or
I'm an owner of this gym and I can relate to that, which is kind of weird. Like
it's true.
I love the idea of it because I come in and think, okay, I'll be training downstairs and I'll be the least experienced in whatever we're doing and the tightest and the weakest. And I think it's hard to move out of what could potentially become a negative thought pattern and flip into, okay, this is actually what I've been striving for as a business owner with these guys from day one. So
have a place where these,
the battle that goes on there, little battle. You know?
Yeah. So I guess there's that comparison, you know, like when you rock up, you know. So how I've sort of tried to approach that, you know, is to just, you know, again, I have to connect with that humility before I even rock up. You know, I have to, you know, and I suppose I feel this most intensely, you know, when I'm on my way to a grappling class. You know, because I know that, you know, I'm going to get tapped out like 20 times. Like, that's the assumption, you know, that there's guys that are just going to absolutely maul me. So, but rather than sort of, you know, thinking about how much it's going to hurt or you know, how much, you know, how horrible it's going to look, you know, I'm just trying to, you know, get to this place where I understand, okay, you know, this is where I am, you know, let me have a go at it anyway. Let me just, you know, it might look a bit awkward, it might look a bit bumbly, but let me just have some fun with it. Just as long as I'm giving it a go. You know, I'm not sort of expected to be awesome at it. I'm not expected to, you know.
What do you actually, like, with your coming to that place before you train or before you say into the gym, do you personally like do anything, like have a moment, or is it just driving in your car and you take yourself to that place and just think, I'm just going to go and then train and do my thing? Or is it something that just happens more automatically for you now because you've been thinking on it for some time? Or do you use like a little, you know?
The moment is actually, like it's before I make the decision to get in the car. Like once I get in the car, I'm sweet. I'm on autopilot.
Yeah,
you know?
okay.
Like once I've actually started chucking on my gear, it's going to happen. Rock up. There's no turning back.
The cues.
You know?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but you know, there's probably that you know, that 1 or 2 minutes before I'm sort of deciding to put my gear on and go to training, where I'm like, oh, am I going to do it? You know.
I've got a lot of study to get done today.
Yeah, I'm working through the excuse list. I'm working through, you know.
So let's say we're discussing someone else that's in your shoes, because there's many people out there that go through that exact scenario. We talked about ways that we get through it.
I think everyone does.
What kind of steps would you advise somebody who's working through these barriers on a mental level? What steps could they take to help overcome the anxiety and the idea of the class being, you know, more intimidating than it actually is, and all that kind of stuff? Like, to sway that decision in the right direction. Is there?
Yeah, sure.
Are there tools?
Yeah. So look, I mean, the first thing for me really is to just accept that, you know, I'm probably not going to look awesome at what I'm doing. You know, I'm probably not going to be on the level that everyone else is, but that's okay, because everyone has to start somewhere. So, and then just sort of, you know, telling myself in the back of the head that, you know, even the people that are awesome at this, you know, no one rocked up sort of instantly able to do what you guys do. It's taken work. It's taken, you know, patience and motivation to get to that point. And even you guys had to start somewhere. So, you know, at least giving myself the opportunity to actually, you know, take a step in that direction, regardless of where I'm at the moment. So, you know, and just sort of telling myself it's okay to take baby steps. It's okay to, you know, just have a go at something. You know, I think in terms of, you know, a lot of the movements that you guys teach, you know, it appears to me that you're quite careful in terms of sort of planning the regressions, you know, for someone like me to actually be able to have somewhere to start. So that, you know, I'm not sort of, you know, jumping in the deep end and you know, having to tackle something that's enormously difficult straight off the bat. But yeah, and then just understanding that, you know, like, you know, especially in an environment like this, and the people that we train with here, like we train with some really cool people that are like super supportive, and, you know, like I've never sort of had anyone, you know, give me dirty looks or judge me in the gym. That's I don't have any evidence to support that idea that I am being judged. So
douchebags don't last at JB.
So
it's a fact.
We judge them.
Yeah, you look like a douchebag. It's not for you.
But yeah, just being able to tell myself, look, I can have a go at something. It's going to look weird. That's fine. At least I'm having a go. I might have some fun with it. Can I laugh at myself at the end of the day if I try and, do a cartwheel and suck miserably, So, there's fun in that process as well. There's a bit of humor around it. So,
do you ever, because I have this, we have this conversation with people often, right? And in a really, a lot of new people that will come to the gym. Perhaps they'll walk past and they'll come to speak to us, and they'll come in while the class is on, and the class will be busy, whatever, there's 15, 16 people, and you often pick up from a conversation that person will think that everyone in that class was super advanced. They'll be like, I came by that time and everybody was doing handstands, or whatever, and you're like, actually there was one person in that class that can do like a 5-second handstand. Like most people were doing something much more, basic than that.
Yeah.
But you come to understand that when people are in that headspace of, I'm a little bit out of my depth, that the perception is that I feel the perception is that everybody else is really advanced.
Yeah.
And they see only the people that are better than them. Yeah. They don't actually see, oh no, there's like a 70-year-old woman over there who's like doing a static hold on the floor, and there's someone there with terrible shoulder mobility. They're stretching their shoulders, and can you talk on that, like that idea of you almost amplify it?
Yeah, it's a me and everyone else kind of proposition. There's no sort of there's no complexity in what everyone else looks like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
just above,
and that's again, when I'm just stuck in my own head, I'm not willing to acknowledge that there's other people that are on different levels. I see someone doing anything handstand related, I'm like, shit, that 10 times better than me.
Yeah.
So but look, I think on a slightly different point. This is where some of the body image, stuff ties into it as well, because it's quite easy for me to get fixated on sort of, okay, I am, this size or this weight, like physically it's impossible, and have that sort of narrative playing in my head, even though there are, I'm seeing video evidence of people my weight doing some really cool stuff, so I don't really have that excuse anymore, but it's part of the narrative, around, I look a certain way, so I shouldn't, I'm not going to be able to accomplish, what everyone else can do. So, and recently I've been trying to get to a place where, and it's still very much a work in progress, where I'm just, I'm more focused on, I want to be more focused on what my body can actually do, rather than how it looks. So, when I come to a place like this and, I'm able to see what sort of gains I've made in terms of, say, squat depth or mobility or things that I couldn't do before that, that I'm slowly sort of making some progress in. It's more useful for me to be able to connect with that than to stay focused on, okay, I still look a certain way, I haven't accomplished anything, I'm still the same weight, I haven't dropped anything, so...
And what you're talking about there, it doesn't matter where you're at in your physical capability, you can always fall into that trap, because there's always going to be someone a little bit better than you. There's always going to be someone a little bit more ripped, a little bigger, a little stronger, that you'll be able to find out there, especially in today's world with access to the internet and the rest of it. So I guess that first step of just accepting where you are now is a strong one, and just being happy with what you got in your skin that you're in.
Absolutely.
There's a thing there that comes to mind, which is really evident in jiu-jitsu, and I have dealt with this myself ever since I started, and I'm better at it now because I've had to get good at it. But I know people starting off really battle with it, and it's the idea that you have a certain place within the team that you train with. So say you come and grapple here at Jungle Brothers, and you have training partners, and you have a level of performance against each of the people in the class that you accept. So it's like, oh, there's the bigger, stronger, more experienced person. They always kick my ass. It's okay. There's the smaller person who's newer. I always kick their ass. You know, you don't consciously think it, but you just kind of subconsciously understand it. And then you take a holiday and you don't come to class for 3 or 4 weeks, and then you come back and the rankings have changed because you haven't been practicing, but the person maybe whose ass you were kicking is now dominating you.
Yeah.
And you get really, it's really easy to get put off by it because you're like, fuck, I've lost. All you see is how far you've fallen.
It's a horrible feeling.
It's like in the fight game, it's huge,
and you know
right?
it's not supposed to hurt, and but it's horrible.
Yeah, and I think it's the worst. It crushes the ego. And I said, like, I've had to adapt to it because I've seen, after 11 or 12 years in the game, I've seen so many people who I was maybe once better than surpass me, infinitely, right? And I'm like, okay, that's how it goes. But the thing is that you will always set yourself up for fail. And we can all acknowledge this. If you compare yourself to the people that you are training with, there's a strong chance, there's a likelihood that you're setting yourself up for failure. So what I tell people in the grappling world, when they come to that sort of issue, it's usually at about sort of 6 to 12 months in the game, I tell them, don't compare yourself to the people that you train with, but compare yourself to your friend who doesn't train, right? Your friend who just sits on the couch all the time and goes out drinking in the evenings. Compare yourself to them. And so even though you took a 3-week holiday, you're still progressing. It's just that you're comparing yourself to people who have been perhaps progressing at a faster rate, or who didn't take a break, or whatever it is. Can you talk on that idea? Because it's the same in a strength environment, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I think, the first thing that sort of comes to mind is, I think, on some level, competition is healthy. Competition does have the potential to, to drive us and bring out the best in us. So, it's a bit of a balance between how much you're sort of able to connect with that and this, this motivation to want to get better on account of, of someone else. And I find that, especially within the realm of martial arts, that's where, it's most prevalent. So, but yeah, you absolutely can get to a toxic level of that where it starts to interfere with, your own individual progress. And I think, when you look at, your journey as a whole, in any sort of given skill set, especially when you're starting to reach, like a more advanced level of it, there's going to be ebbs and flows in your own individual journey. Your rate of skill acquisition is never going to be perfectly linear. For some people, there might be a really steep learning curve, there might be beginner's luck, there might be, whatever it is, but different people are going to reach plateaus in their journey, and like when you're just reflecting on your own journey in a particular thing, you come to understand that your journey compared to someone else's journey, it may just be a question of where they are on the curve versus where you are on the curve. So, but in terms of what you guys do here, around like the periodized training and the focus on different movements at different times, some things take a back seat, some in order to bring a more specific focus onto something else. So I imagine that within the realm of your training that you would understand that even if you are sort of putting something on hold, that doesn't mean you're not making gains in other areas. So it doesn't mean that you're not getting the benefit of even if you're taking a holiday,
you're developing something else.
What's that doing for your mental health? What's that doing for your overall health? On what level is that productive versus just smashing yourself with jiu-jitsu? Absolutely. So there is always some type of benefit to be had in terms of what you're working on. So to compare yourself along one dimension across one fixed point in time is really you're not going to get a whole lot of accuracy in that comparison. So
it's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's true. We by nature of the variety of training we do here, that is a given that you cannot progress in all areas all the time. And that's just talking the training sense, right? So we end up having that discussion a lot. And I think we've all come to accept it, really well. But there's still people, members of ours who are younger in that journey, and they battle with it. Oh, my deadlift is not what it was last year. I failed. You're like, dude, you've done all this other cool shit.
I think especially when you're making like a lot of gains really early in your journey, you assume that that's the norm.
Yes.
That this is the rate at which I'm going to be progressing from here on in. In 3 years, I should be deadlifting 300 kilos.
Yeah.
If I work it out that way.
I've done the maths, man.
Yeah. So, it's a tempting trap to fall into, but yeah, life just doesn't work that way. So,
when we talk about getting into situations where you start to feel like the anxiety and the self-criticism, is it a bad thing? Because it always seems like it's in environments that potentially going to help you grow. So this exposure to an environment that makes you feel a little bit anxious or makes you feel a bit on edge, a lot of the times that's the environment that you potentially need to be stronger in.
Yeah.
So is there a balance there? Because you don't want to avoid the areas in life that make you feel a discomfort.
Yeah.
So I've got a perfect example actually. We had a member last night came in to do a strength and movement class. She got halfway through the warm up, and it wasn't what she thought it was going to be like, and she just she had to walk out and get some fresh air outside, and she'd felt like she'd bitten off more than she could chew on that day. Emotions got the better of her. What would you... Obviously, we all know that where she was where she needed to be. It's a good place for her.
Yeah.
But how do you go about reintroducing that environment at a rate where it's healthy for them and not going to have that continual, just feeling like shit every time they come in and not being able to get through it?
Yeah, sure. So, I think that, when it comes to, anxiety, and you talk about, sort of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, you're absolutely right. There is a level of that is healthy. But there's a difference between sort of pushing yourself just outside your comfort zone versus, jumping in the deep end. And so, I think, for me, and this was, an insight that funnily enough, I gained in a yoga class.
How dare you?
Yeah, I know. I was sitting in a yin yoga class. I was getting into that for a bit, and when I first rocked up, the idea, I thought, the goal was to sort of push yourself as hard as you can to stretch as far as you can and just hold it and sit there and endure the torturous pain. And then when it was explained to me, no, the goal is to sort of find that sweet spot, that edge, which is just outside of your comfort zone. And then sink into that, and then find a way to incorporate that, into your comfort zone. Give it a chance to breathe and to move, and then you'll find that slowly, you'll start to make progress, further than you would have if you were just sort of going all out and pushing yourself. And, that was a lesson that, I've sort of tried to extrapolate to life in general, around, it's not about sort of taking these quantum leaps forward, in terms of your comfort zone. It's finding a way to just sort of sit just on the boundary out of, like what's starting to bring up that heart rate for me a little bit, what's starting to induce a little bit of anxiety, and then sitting there, not feeling obliged to sort of go further, but just finding a way to just sit with that discomfort for a little bit, and then seeing how you feel. Do you want to push it further? Have you had enough? Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to anxiety that you would feel in a situation like in this environment, I think the first thing that you've got to do is just sort of regulate the physiology. If you can find a way to maybe just maybe you have to walk out, maybe you have to just focus on some breathing and just find a way to settle your heart rate, settle your nerves a little bit, and then make a decision around what you want to do next. Whether or not you still want to go back in there and re-engage with it, or if you've had enough for the day. I think that you guys put a lot of effort into really creating a safe environment here where, people don't, I've never sort of been forced to do anything in here. It's always like, okay, can you do this? Do you want to have a go at it? Like that's that's how I've always felt in here. And I imagine that, continuing to push that message around, like, what do you feel comfortable doing? This is what we're doing. How far do you want to take it? If you need to, if you need to take it back, then that's okay. If you need to sit this one out, then that's okay. But where's your comfort level sitting? How far do you want to push yourself? So
I want to ask, like, obviously we're not psychologists here as personal trainers or coaches, but often we sit in that
unofficially
chair.
We
Unofficially we are.
Yeah.
So like,
Giving advice all day, bro.
Yeah. I know. So we give them this advice,
I'll
and
tell you what's wrong with all of you guys.
Leave her. Tell her she's no good for you.
So, we try to provide that environment, and we're getting people to push that comfort zone, that barrier, and then say, for instance, in this case, they step too far, we encourage them to just come back a little bit and then rebuild, etc. So we're giving a lot of people like that advice to keep them going, to keep them in the game and moving forward. Sometimes it can feel like we're just putting a Band-Aid on the situation.
Yeah.
So, everyone's got a level of anxiety and feels what we're talking about here today to different degrees of different dosages. But, you see people who are, I can see like there's more work to be done there. There's deeper questions and issues that they're not dealing with or that they probably need to address. And, this goes back to whatever your upbringing, your influences, yada, yada, yada. I guess, my question is like, what's your advice what's your perspective on that? I mean, only in extreme cases I'll say, you should talk to a professional, because I can only just help you in these moments. But what I'm trying to get at?
I totally get that.
Like all the motivation stuff's cool, but you kind of got to go to the deeper question.
Yeah. So look,
for the long term game.
In all fairness, I'm probably a bit biased on this, but I'm the type of person that thinks everyone has work to do on that level.
Yeah, I agree.
And that like when we, like part of my vision is when we talk about physical health, there's you can differentiate between who's sick and who's not, but within the subgroup of who's not sick, there's still a whole bunch of work on your physical health and varying levels of physical health that can be done, to improve your physical health. So, mental health really isn't any different. You can differentiate between who's sort of really struggling with something and who's not. But again, there's still a whole bunch of stuff that you can be doing, even if you're not struggling on that level, to improve, your mental health. And I think, in terms of sort of differentiating between, whether or not you should be referring someone on to someone else or how to handle that conversation, really the question that springs to mind is, this particular issue that you're describing, how much of an impact is it having on your life? So, is this affecting your work? Is this affecting, your relationships? Is this affecting, your day-to-day activities? If it's interfering with that on any level, then you should be looking at it more seriously. But if it's something that sort of, pops up from time to time, you're kind of aware of it, but for whatever reason, life is happily plodding along. You're doing everything that you want to do. I'm not going to tell you to ignore it, but I'd say it's probably not as much of a pressing concern in terms of like you actually need to go and get help. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like the best thing that you could do in that sort of situation is just, not even have to feel obliged to give advice or anything like that, but create a space where, people feel comfortable enough to actually tell you what's going on for them. Like if you're able to build trust on that level where someone is able to connect with you and share some vulnerable stuff, that alone has a healing effect. So it's less about, and sometimes I think the tendency for us is to fall into this problem solution mind frame, and mental health really doesn't work that way. Like if I bring you a problem, I'm not necessarily looking for a solution. Maybe I'm just looking for someone to listen.
Great point.
Quite often, and you'll hear, in some realms of psychology and mental health, they refer to this idea of, our innate, healing ability, on a psychological level. So, being just having access to a space where we can do that own work ourselves, and possibly needing some level of guidance, but not actually needing someone to go in there and fix our problems and tell us what to do. There is a level that we are able to accomplish all by ourselves, provided, we've got an adequate support network, provided we've got people that we trust and that we can just sort of, verbalize. Because, sometimes just by just by describing an issue to someone else, you can come to understand, hey, this is not what I thought, this is just having to actually find the words to describe something that's going on in your head. Have you ever had that feeling when you say something and it's like, oh, now that I've said it, that really sounds kind of stupid.
I have that with my wife, like when there's a bit of tension and something's come up and then we're having a not really argument, but it's just like releasing whatever it is. And as I'm trying to articulate that thing, by the end of saying it all, I'm like, yeah, it seems so silly.
Yeah.
Well, it's just weird how the brain works, or like human mind works like that.
Yeah. So there is benefit from your perspective of, again, just being able to give someone that opportunity and not feeling like you actually have to say the perfect thing, or you actually have to, because the perfect thing to say doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to give someone that perfect piece of advice that's instantly going to fix all their problems. But
you just need to harden up, mate.
I usually just say, okay, just do another set.
Yep. One more set. Up.
That will solve.
I've got my next client.
All right, let's have a stretch. But like on a serious note, I know for myself as a coach, I never want to try and cross that line of giving somebody like prescribing advice for somebody's issues. It's very important. And I think if you're dealing with a friend even, and they're coming to you and they're talking to you and opening up to you, it can be very easy just to say, like, for instance, you got to leave him, or something that's like swaying the decision.
Something definitive.
Yeah. And it's a fine line, especially in what we do, because physical activity starts to release a lot of stuff.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. So
I almost feel like in that idea of sort of personal development, that people often start with the physical side. They start with training, and then once they sort of get a handle on that, it sort of starts to go into towards lifestyle and habits and mindset and all those more emotional things, or less physical things, I suppose. So
it's like a pressure valve.
Yeah.
Just releases.
And it's true, you do encounter a lot of that where you're like, oh shit, I didn't know we were going to get to this point.
So when we're talking about, you mentioned just like physical health, and you can continue to work on that and better yourself at it, you can do the same with your mental health.
Yeah.
What kind of practice does that look like? So we've talked about just talking to others and being in that environment where you feel you can share, like connection.
Yeah.
What other stuff could you be doing to just keep everything healthy?
Sure. I think, where I sort of imagine most people, have an opportunity for gain is around self-awareness. I think that there's things that are happening on an emotional level which, if we're not accustomed to tuning into it, can fly completely under the radar. So, say for example, when going back to the shame thing, you know, it's a difficult emotion to be able to identify. You know, like, you know, and it's pervasive. Like, you know, if you think about, you know, there are people out there that sort of make life decisions, you know, based on shame. It's like, okay, you know, what subject am I going to sign up for at uni, or what course am I going to do? Do I want to be a doctor or lawyer to make, you know, mum and dad happy? You know, what's going to bring, you know, most money? What's going to bring me, you know, respect? You know, these are things that you wouldn't even, you know, on the surface of it, you wouldn't even suspect that you've been influenced by an emotion into a thinking pattern that's affected the rest of your life. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So being able to identify, you know, what those emotions are and when they actually do come up for you, you know, is a great starting point, and just sort of really asking yourself, you know, how you feel at any given point in time. Because the more that you're able to check in with, you know, how you're feeling, the more you can come to understand what type of influence that's having over your thinking patterns, and actually start to get some distance from it, so that you're not sort of accepting your thought patterns as gospel truths, you know, all the time. You understand that, you know, like thoughts are thoughts, they're fallible. They're not sort of, you know, an instant reflection of who I am at any point in time. They can be influenced. So, you know, I really think that building self-awareness is a great first place to start.
What's a tool, or what are tools that one might, you know, would you say journaling or meditation?
Yeah, both those things come to the top of the list. Absolutely. So, yeah.
They're great tools. Yeah,
Tell me more about your interpretation of... Sorry, Paul.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, just on the self-awareness thing, I get that those are great tools and I use them too, but then I see the dangers, the things that are built into this world that keep you in between, from being self-aware, largely the overstimulation of people looking outwardly towards the world with social media, etc. and just shit. I just find, even me, and I feel like I'm pretty aware of all this stuff, I can totally get caught up in being distracted. I jump in the car, I put on my podcast, and I do that like habitually. And then some days, like last night, I got halfway through and I was like, why the hell am I listening to this for? I've actually got heaps of shit to deal with in my mind. I switched it off and I had some good time with myself. But, you know, I'm like 36. Like, there's kids out there that don't have that level of awareness. And I mean, it's cool. I just thought I'd comment that it's hard for people to have that time or that maturity to stop. And because I feel like if they sat in a room alone, they'd come to some of these conclusions. Yeah. No, I agree 100%. But, you know, I think, firstly, in terms of what you're describing and actually sharing, you know, your struggles around there, that, you know, that's a message that a lot of people need to hear. That, you know, I mean, you know, from sitting in my chair, you know, like, it's quite easy for me to go into a place where, like, you guys, you know, you guys all have it together. You know, how wrong you are. You guys are all doing really well. You're super fit. You're doing this. You're doing that.
Killing it, bro.
Like, exactly. So, but yeah. Firstly, in terms of you, sort of, you know, being willing to share, you know, like what you're struggling with in terms of, you know, carving out that time for yourself. I think it's an important message. In terms of how to solve that, you know, I think it's starting to make its way more and more into the mainstream that you know, meditation, journaling, you know, these things are starting to become a little bit like fads. But that doesn't mean there isn't any benefit in it. It's just becoming, it's just becoming more accepted. It's making its way into the mainstream that, you know, we do actually need to carve out some time for ourselves to engage in these self-care activities. So I think, you know, that's going to be an ongoing challenge. And as that we continue to evolve as a society, that's going to become more and more acceptable and more common and more, you know, like top of mind in how we
necessary as well, considering what Paul was talking about, the overstimulation and access to information nowadays.
Absolutely.
I was listening to that Naval, what's his name?
Ravikant
the other day. He was saying something. It was on the Joe Rogan podcast. What's he? I think he's
an investor.
He's an investor, but he's got
who's read a fuckload of books.
Yeah, but he was just
thought a
saying he thinks that it's like our generation, like it's generational. Our generation is kind of going through the heaviest part of the transition, and the way that we're learning how to deal with this, and we're trying to get the levels right.
Yeah.
Between we've got the technology, we've got exposure, we've got
All
anxiety
the information.
levels. Yeah, all the information just overloaded, anxiety levels, suicide levels just skyrocketing, and then now we're trying to find the solutions for it, and we'll figure it out as a human race. He's very optimistic.
He is.
Okay. No, I haven't checked out that podcast yet.
It's cool, man. He has a good quote from somebody else. I don't remember it exactly, but it's along the lines of the majority of man's problems come about because he can't sit in a room by himself for an hour.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I can relate to that.
Journal. What would you advise someone writes in a journal?
I actually really like Joey gave me a template of I don't know where you got it from, but
This one here?
I have had a bit of a crack
Right.
at that journal.
Okay.
It's been a little bit more difficult for me to connect with that, but look, I still remember the template you gave me. It was really simple. It was like, okay, just a set of questions that you go through every day. So, firstly, how did you go today? Like what did you do well? How do you think you went? Number two, what are you feeling heavy about? Number three, what are you feeling light about? Number four, a few things you're grateful for. And then number five was like your goals for the next day. The goal thing, I've kind of struggled with. So, I changed it to, what are your plans for the next day? Because plans seems a little bit more flexible, and I'd keep beating myself up for writing goals every day and then not doing anything.
It's an
about
expectation, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this is not working for me. This is,
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
but one thing that's again, something else Joey gave me was he encouraged me to answer the question, why do I train? And that was something that I stuck with for a while, and I got a whole benefit out of really connecting with the reasons why I'm doing something, especially if it's something that I have to try and motivate myself to do. So where that's actually really important is I've since learned some theory about motivation through my psych studies. So it's a little bit heavy, but I'm happy to share with you guys if that's how
Please do. Podcast.
So one of the more one of the most recent theories of motivation is something called self-determination theory. And the idea behind it is that the central sort of distinction in motivation is what they call controlled motivation. So these are things that where the behavior is sort of contingent upon something else happening that's external to us. So in some cases it can be a reward or a punishment, versus autonomous motivation. So these are things that we can rely on within ourselves to be able to motivate us to engage in a behavior. So I think when we talk about, say, control motivation, if you were to engage in a fitness activity and someone offered you money, you would do something that you don't want to do for money, or for some type of reward, or if someone said
Anything,
or if someone said, I'm going to kick your ass if you don't do this. Again, reward, punishment. It works on that level. There's another part of that's called it's like a continuum. They try to describe it as a continuum between controlled and autonomous motivation. So at the other end of that continuum is what they call intrinsic motivation, where you do something because you like doing it. You actually enjoy the activity. It's not hard to get motivated, if you actually enjoy
There's
doing
nothing
something.
External about it. It's all within you.
No, you actually want to do it because you enjoy it. So the first step up on the continuum from that purely externally regulated motivation is something called introjected regulation. So what this means is that it's not so much about someone else that's going to give you a reward or a punishment, but it's more about how you feel about yourself as a result of engaging in a behavior. If you perceive that you're going to be judged by other people for not doing something, then that's a motivation for you to do the behavior. So it's not entirely internal, because in the absence of other people, there's still not that motivation to engage in it. But if something makes you look good, or you get a sense of pride out of it, or you're trying to show off to someone else, this idea that somehow other people are involved with our own motivation to do a behavior because of how we feel. And that's where that whole shame piece really sits, because, like if it's like, I have to exercise because, I don't want to look horrible, that really feeds that whole shame piece around, how we perceive others are judging us. So it's thought to be not an entirely stable form. Introjected regulation.
So let's say we create a scenario here, which is quite common, I think. Somebody's driven by autonomous motivation, and it's exercise. Doctor said, if you don't start moving, you fucking die, or you know that you need it, but you don't like it. Can you move autonomous motivation? Can that transition into something intrinsic? And what's the steps involved in something like that?
Sure, yeah, you absolutely can. So let me just finish off the other 2 points, because it sort of ties in together. So the next step up on that continuum from introjected is what they call identified regulation. So that's where you intrinsically value the outcome of what you're doing. You might not actually enjoy doing it, but in terms of what that activity means to you, the outcome is genuinely important to you. It's not a function of what someone else wants. It's not in any way affected by other people. So when you've sort of identified what things are important to you in life, that's when it's easy to be able to connect with the role that this activity plays in terms of you getting the outcome that you want. So
I feel introjected motivation when I'm doing my tax.
you get judged for not doing your tax. Yeah. So the next step up from that is what they call integrated regulation, and this is this idea that this activity actually forms a part of our identity. It's a case of this is who we are, and this activity, even if we don't enjoy doing it, is consistent with who we are, what we value, our lifestyle, what we present to the world. So, and this idea that if you didn't do this, like, whatever activity it is, be it exercise, you would notice its absence. You would feel really weird about it because you're not being consistent with who you are. So it's meant to be identified as the gold standard in terms of what sustainable motivation is, when you've been able to have a proper think about who you are, what your identity is, what your values are, what's consistent with that, and what activities are consistent with that. That's when you're able to get to that place of motivation. So they describe this process of internalization. So around how an activity starts to move along the continuum, which is what you were asking before. And this is where the theory starts to get a little bit hazy for me, so bear with me here. But they talk about how if an activity is able to satisfy 3 basic psychological needs, then that will affect the degree to which it can be internalized. So those needs are, firstly, autonomy. We need to feel like it's something we actually have a choice about. Mm-hmm. We need to feel somehow like we're in control of this activity that we're doing. If it feels like something we're being forced into, then we don't feel in control. We don't feel like it's actually our decision. The 2 other needs are the need for competence and the need for relatedness. So competence is this idea that we need to actually be able to do it. It needs to be something that's sort of, within our skill set, and not something that we completely suck at.
Right.
So, there needs to be some part of, the task, even if it's sort of, range of tasks or something that we get better at over time, it needs to be clear when we're actually able to accomplish it. And the need for relatedness, it's really basic needs, just about being able to connect with people. So, if you're able to satisfy, if an activity is able to satisfy those three needs, then even if you're not at that point of integrated regulation, then you at least give it the opportunity to start to internalize, some of those behaviors. So,
and it starts and it moves along that, it moves along that continuum. So it may not be integrated to start with.
Yeah, so
but in time it could be.
The guys that wrote the theory were pretty adamant about saying it's not like a stage thing. It's not something that you sort of move through linearly. There might be, again, ebbs and flows in that journey. There might be, a whole bunch of stuff that happens. But bringing it back to, what we were talking about before with the journal. So when you asked me, why do you want to train, and actually being able to go to my journal and connect with that every day, again, rather than sort of focusing on, I want to train because I want to look good or because I want to, I'm trying to satisfy how other people see me. It's like, okay, no, where does this activity actually sit within my identity? Where does this sit within my own framework of values? Why am I doing this? And really taking the time to connect with that on a regular basis is something that I got a whole lot of benefit out of. And it's consistent with the theory.
That's cool. That's really interesting that there's a science or a theory behind that idea. I guess it's asking you to be introspective about responding to that question, isn't it? Rather than because I want to lose weight or because I want to be, something that is external, extrinsic.
So again, for someone like me, being able to go back to, okay, what can my body actually do? What do I want my body to be able to do rather than how does it look? Is something that's just helped me get humble about, where I am and sort of break out of this mind frame of, I can't do X and X because I look a certain way, So, again, ongoing challenge for me. Definitely a work in progress, but, that's hopefully the direction I'm headed in. So,
do you feel like having more understanding around how this all works, does it make it any easier or harder for you?
Well, again, there are things that I have been able to take that work for me, and there's things, I'm like, okay, I get it on one level, but I'm really struggling to actually apply it in my own lives. It's that disconnect between, theory and practice sometimes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but yeah, look, I think, at least having some perspective on it is a great place to start. So,
Kareem, you mentioned shame a lot.
yeah.
And then we talk about, the self-awareness. And, I mean, there's so many. I'm guessing the more, how would you say, the more emotions you understand the definition of, the more emotionally aware you become. Is that because when you say shame, and then I think about, okay, we've got shame, and then think about other emotions that are potentially connected to that, or you could like maybe just think you're angry, but you don't realize that it's actually shame. And then you lash out instead of dealing with what's going on. What's the difference between what's the difference between feeling shameful and guilt?
Yeah, no, great question.
Because
a lot of people struggle with this one. So, the way it was described to me was that, when you feel guilt, it's more in response to a specific behavior that you've done. So it's not necessarily a judgment about who you are as a whole. To say, like if I skip training today, I might feel guilty about it, but I understand that that's not, it may not be a reflection on who I am in general. Do you know what I mean? So whereas if I engage in the shame pathway, it's like if I do something wrong, then that's a direct reflection on who I am. So it's like I'm a horrible person who doesn't train if I skip a day. So I think, it is easy for people to sort of get the two mixed up. And what you find is that, people that have been able to, that are better at sort of dealing with shame tend to engage with or tend to connect with their guilt, a little bit more often, rather than sort of mistaking it for shame. Because guilt, it's all emotions are impermanent, but guilt it's more of a temporary kind of thing. Is that you understand that this is something that it doesn't have its place in the broader scheme of things. That you've done something wrong and you probably shouldn't do that. Like if you've I don't know, trying to come up with good examples here. They're just they're not coming to me. But if you've hurt someone, if you shouted at someone, say, like you might feel guilty about doing that, but that doesn't make you like an aggressive person that should be locked up. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't instantly make you a criminal. Whereas some people might, if someone has a habit of doing that, then it's quite easy for them to engage in feeling shameful about that. Does that sort of make sense?
I get it. So it's more about perhaps repeated behaviours or maybe something that is more consistently part of your character that would make you feel shameful rather than a one-off thing, or
it's
kind of what you're pointing to?
Well, not necessarily, because some people can feel shame over a one-off a one-off event. Like if a person hasn't sort of reached that level of emotional health or emotional maturity, then they can still do something which a normal person would feel guilty about, but for them it's just it engages that inner critic instantly. Yep. They go straight to that place of shame. Whereas like a person that has done a little bit more work on themselves is sort of able to get to that place of guilt.
Do you think it's worth for anyone to get themselves more educated in emotional vocabulary and then learn to increase their emotional intelligence so they can identify, for instance, the difference between feeling guilty and shameful or just feeling angry, so they can deal with the issues that they're going through? Or would you just go to a psychologist?
Well, here's another mind screw just in relation to what you were saying before. There's in some circumstances, there's a secondary set of emotions which mask your initial one. So when you talk about sort of not knowing what's going on and then getting angry,
complex things, aren't we?
Yeah, some people get angry because they don't know what the hell's going on, or because they're feeling sad and they're just trying to break out of that mind frame. So it's another level of complexity to what's going on. 100% I agree. People should get educated about it, but it's more than just sort of looking it up in a textbook. I think the only way to build real awareness around it is to constantly be checking in with yourself. How am I feeling? Once you've read the dictionary on that, to go back and regularly ask yourself, check in with it. So because otherwise, if you're not on the lookout for what these things are, you don't actually know, when they're coming up for you or not. So
and it could be dangerous if you're not identifying something for what it really is.
So there's a theory that emotions are messengers of the psyche. So that there's a reason why we've evolved with them. They're designed to help us in some way. They're designed to give us some really important information. So that being said, they're not always going to be entirely accurate
or beneficial, because the environment's changed.
So in a modern environment it's not always going to be useful, but say for example something like guilt. When we connect with why am I feeling guilty, it's because the idea is that in some way we're meant to correct our behavior based on what we're feeling. So if you were to feel guilty after doing something, that's your psyche's red flag to tell you, hey, don't do this. You're going to feel like shit after it. You know? So when you're able to draw the link between the two, it's like, okay, I can change who I am as a person and not engage in that behavior because I don't like how I feel when I do it.
Yeah.
So when you're, say, like if you're feeling sad, some would argue that the purpose of of the emotion of sadness is for you to reach out and to actually connect with other people, because that's what, evolutionarily is meant to, increase our chances of survival. So, it does start to get a little bit more complex, and some would argue that the reason that we feel shame is to improve ourselves. The problem in today's society is that quite often we experience that toxic level of shame, where it just takes it too far, and it actually interferes with our desire to get better. It actually stops us from getting off the start line to begin with.
Almost like when it becomes a chronic thing rather than an acute thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mentioned the guilt thing because I've dealt with a lot of, especially one-to-one, just one-to-one coaching, like physical coaching, where I've done everything in my power to help somebody, and no change has taken place. And I know that I'm out of my depth, and it's not something that I'm capable of dealing with. I don't have the credentials, but it's always come back to the guilty eating, the guilty binging, the guilty skipping training and feeling guilty about this kind of stuff. But when you're dealing with emotions like this, I'm guessing that they have some kind of chemical reaction. If you're getting long-term exposure to this kind of reaction, does it become almost an addiction?
Ooh, probably getting a little bit out of my depth here, to be honest.
Just tell us.
Because it just seems like these things become habitual, and when things become habitual, it's very difficult to break out of those habits.
There is a level of familiarity in terms of what we know about our own response patterns. Like when we get in certain situations, say someone might have a tendency to avoid conflict or something like that. They've identified when they're in that situation, they feel uncomfortable, or they feel bad, and they can get rid of that bad feeling by just walking away. So I suppose when you get reinforced on that level, it does start to ingrain those patterns of behavior. So that's it's quite a complicated area of psychology.
That seems, from my complete lack of education around this, but I feel like that becomes a behavioural thing, whereby you resort back to that your standard behaviour, which then you end up feeling the thing, which let's say it's a negative thing, like you respond a particular way, then you get angry, then you feel guilty, and you're like, fuck, I don't want to do that anymore, and then you do it again, and then you keep doing that and until you find a way to change that behavior.
Yeah. It's there's a whole, and I suppose this starts to go into like psychotherapy, models. Where I work at South Pacific Private, they use something called a model of developmental immaturity, which basically takes a look at what your maladaptive coping strategies are. So how these things actually come about, and starting to trace it back in terms of their development. As a child. So, when you...
This could go back generations as well, this kind of thing.
Well, a lot of it has to do with how you're parented. So, the theory behind the model is that, every child has, some basic needs, and that, if a parent, is able to provide for those basic needs, then they're not going to sort of develop issues. But if any one of those needs isn't met, then, the child has to adapt.
What are those needs?
Stretching my memory here, but...
you got kids, bro. This alarms me.
A child is...
to make sure I'm on the right track.
Yeah. Is food one of those?
In terms of, basic psychological needs. A child is imperfect. A child is vulnerable. A child. Damn it, I'm drawing blanks. There's like 5 of them. A child is, I think, worthy is one of them. Anyway, so the idea is that basically, if you're parented in a way that acknowledges what these needs are. So say, for example, if if a parent doesn't recognize that his child is imperfect, they just expect them to do the right thing all the time. That child can go on to develop a complex between, their what they call their wounded child, which is where they're operating from a place where there's a core belief that they're bad, that they're, and sometimes they might become rebellious, and that can wind up, manifesting into something completely different in adulthood where they turn into a perfectionist. So there's that whole continuum of behaviours.
It's interesting that you say that, because in this day and age, and especially in the fitness industry, perfectionism is almost looked at as like an achievement. Like, oh, he's a perfectionist, she's a perfectionist. But we know that's not necessarily the case, is it?
No.
Can you tell us a little bit more about?
Yeah, and I think
the behind that,
the perfectionism thing, it's intricately linked to shame. So it's this idea that unless it has to be perfect because I will be judged if it's not perfect. So I think where it starts to become a problem is for some people. It can actually feed procrastination. So, for some people, if they don't feel as though they're going to be able to achieve perfection, they don't even try. They don't actually get off,
I'm never going to win that.
Yeah, so I might as well not try. I can't fail if I don't try, So I think for other people, you can get to a place where, say, you've finished a job, but it's not entirely perfect, and because you've got that perfectionist tendency, you might wind up spending X amount of time for a really minimal sort of marginal gain in terms of the quality of the project, and that's time that you could have spent doing something else which would have been more useful to you. But
they're not capable of near enough, good enough, and moving on to the bigger picture.
Yeah, it has to be absolutely perfect, and again, that's just something that can interfere with people's functioning. So it can be quite debilitating if someone really feeds that, because it's either they don't try to begin with, or they wind up wasting a whole lot of time on something which wasn't entirely necessary. So I don't really have any sort of antidotes to that.
Kareem, we've got to wrap up in a sec, but I wanted to kind of ask in a very brief sense. You've touched on journaling as a way for people to become a bit more self-aware of their own thought and their own thought patterns and their own sort of internal dialogue.
Yeah.
Do you have another thing that they could do to start to cultivate that self-awareness? Be it a book you'd recommend, or a meditation app you like to use, or an experience that might help?
Oh, okay. Book I'd recommend, Power of Vulnerability by Brené Brown. An app I'd recommend. I got into Smiling Mind, a meditation app. It's an Australian one, so I don't know why that did it for me. Sam Harris's new app called Waking Up. That's another meditation app which... I've played around with it a little bit, but he's got some quality stuff in there, and he's got some lectures and things as well that are attached to the app, so I would highly recommend that. What else around? I don't have a whole lot around journaling, but I think
it's a pretty good place to start, man.
Yeah, I'd say the only other thing I'd offer with journaling is make it unique to you. If there's something that you need to connect with on a more regular basis. So again, in my example is, why do I train? If there's some other type of behavior that you're wanting to to motivate yourself to do, connect with why you're doing it. Ask yourself why you're doing it on a regular basis. Really help sort of clarify what your values are, and where that behavior fits into the broader scheme of things. And if you're able to continue to connect with it, you'll be able to keep it top of mind. So again, for me, it's training. For someone else, might be completely something different. So
spot on, man. Well, that's super cool, bro. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
And I got some other takeaways that we got from today. connection, surround yourself with the right people, good people. Acceptance.
Yeah.
This is dealing with your inner critic. It takes work. It's okay to have a go. Find a place of support. Be a good listener for those around us that could be going through a similar journey.
Yeah.
And the self-awareness is the big takeaway for me. And satisfy autonomy, competence, and find the relativeness in what you're doing.
Yeah.
The 3 needs.
Relatedness. Yeah. So
Very nice.
I might just take a quick moment to just thank you guys for the space that you've created, because I think, that for me, this is like a really, I've trained at a whole bunch of gyms in my life. I've gone to a whole bunch of sort of commercial places where, again, with the whole body image thing, it's been sort of difficult for me to engage with what they do. But, I've over time developed this vision of what health is, what fitness is. That's not, just about jumping on a treadmill or lifting some weights. And I think that, with what you guys are doing, it's you're sharing your vision, with me, and it's something that, I wholeheartedly subscribe to in terms of, I think the fight, lift, move thing really sort of, encapsulates that as a whole. And I just think it's really inspiring what you guys are doing. And I just want to thank you for, creating this space and sharing it with me. So
Thank you, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Love having you around, bro.
Yeah, awesome. And thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us today.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of people out there get heaps out of this podcast.
Absolutely.
I hope so. Thanks.
Yeah, and congrats on the 135 kilo back squat this morning, bro.
Appreciate it.
Jesus.
Thanks for tuning in today, guys. We're going to wrap it up there. You can get us at junglebrothers.com. You can check us out on YouTube or Instagram. If you want to know more about anything we're doing, just get in touch. If you like the episode and you have a friend who would benefit from listening to it, please share it with them and give us an epic review. Thanks, guys. See you next week.
See you next
Thank you
week.
again.
See ya.